Starting the YouTube live now.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Masterclass for Rockschool for Music Production. It's good to see so many of you here. I can see that a lot of you have taken the initiative to take out the time. So thank you for that. And what we're going to go through today is primarily grade 6, 7, and 8 of the Rock School coursework program for music production. And what I'm going to do is I have a session prepared, which I had initially used for our level 2 workshop. Okay. Now that's going to act as our basic outline because most of the stuff that I covered in the last workshop, applies to grade 6, 7, and 8 as well. Okay. And what we're going to do is go over, of course, the main tasks that are involved with 6, 7, and 8 grade in the music production program, which primarily revolves around mixing techniques such as parallel compression, how to correctly use EQ, compressors, and effects and other processing tools to basically get a nice and balanced mix, because in the coursework tasks, especially in grades 7 and 8, you'll be not only asked to produce music using VSTs and of course audio samples, but it is very important for you guys to also know how to process it. Okay, number one, and make it sound great. And our aim with this is that when we talk about mixing techniques, because all these are under mixing basically, is that it has to sound consistently good on all mediums, meaning that it don't take it for granted that every listener or everybody who's judging your work has the same set of speakers or the same set of good quality headphones that you might have. Okay, as producers or mix engineers, because usually obviously when you're producing music, even at an amateur level, you do tend to invest in semi pro gear, which means you'll have good quality headphones, you'll have good quality audio interfaces and things like that. And everybody doesn't have that same output to consume the audio. Okay, so our aim is that whether a person is listening to your music on a phone or a pair of hi-fi speakers that cost a bomb, it should still sound great. Because the biggest mistake that all of us, including me, in the beginning, we make is that we're like, if let's say I'm listening to your work and I'm like, oh, it's not sounding quite right, the first question people ask is, oh, what speakers are you listening to, you know the music on, or what headphones? Well, it does shouldn't matter, you know because it should sound consistently great on everything. Okay, now how we do that is that, I'm just going to cover a few misconceptions first, and then we'll jump into the session. Okay, so the first thing is that, you have to understand that, whether you're listening to it on a speaker that's 1 centimeter big, for example, in a mobile phone, or a pair of hi-fi speakers. Okay, everything that is there in terms of the music and the vocals should basically be audible. Now, when I say that, it doesn't mean that you'll actually feel the punch of the bass on phone speakers, but you should still be able to figure out the bass line, what notes are being played. And that comes when you have a great understanding of not just the lows and the highs, because in the beginning most people tend to crank up the lows to feel something and crank up the highs, the treble, to get brightness, right? But you need to have a great understanding of the mid range as well, you know and if you see any videos or tutorials by amazing mix engineers out there, they will always say that, the key to a good mix or a balanced sound lies in the mid range. Okay, which is why if you listen to any pop song, any song that's basically in the Billboard top 100, right, the thing is they will sound great on any medium. So our aim should, right from the beginning, be that everything should sound great no matter what the medium is. Okay, now I'm just going to quickly share the screen with you guys. And as you can see, I have a session prepared. I hope everybody can see this, right?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, so now this is the same session that I kind of had produced for our previous workshop, but we're going to take it to the next step. Okay, meaning that I'm going to discuss how to process vocals, how to perhaps harmonize vocals as well if you don't have a harmony layer and things like that, you know. And apart from that, we're going to go over compression and how to approach processing for different instruments. You know, just because you have tools available to you in the software doesn't mean that you need to apply it to everything, you know. And of course, when you're talking about high transient instruments, when I say transient, meaning that instruments such as percussion and drums, or even bass for that matter, that have a very strong attack, you know, the characteristic of that sound is the fact that it has a lot of attack, right? So you can't, you know, suppress that with compression. If you need a kick to sound punchy, you know, especially in an electronic dance mix or those kind of, you know, genres, then you have to be very careful with compression. Okay, when you're doing band recordings, things are slightly different in that context because everything is being recorded live, right? So, you know, your approach to music will change ever so slightly depending on the genre. Okay, but irrespective of that, most of these tips, tricks, and techniques, right, will apply through the board for everything. Okay, so let me just go over. I do see some familiar faces from the previous workshop, so I'm pretty sure you guys know this session. And for all the ones who are new, let's just go over this now. The thing is, right now in this current state, I've actually made it unbalanced. I did that yesterday, so that it sounds a bit all over the place, because a lot of times when you're producing music, you know, you're going with the flow and you're really not worrying about gain staging. You're not really worrying about what is clipping, what is not. So I actually simulated that a little bit. So you might notice that some of the musical parts are too loud or too soft, and we're going to approach it from a mix standpoint then. How to improve this? Okay, so let's just listen to this.
Mi canción favorita, siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche. Mi canción favorita, siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche. Mi canción favorita, siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche. La vida es un carrusel, vamos a disfrutarla.
So this is the verse.
Es para mí, para ti. Es un carrusel, es un carrusel. Fino al amanecer, la 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 la. A mirar la luna, la 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 la. Fino al amanecer, la 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 la. A mirar la luna, la 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 la. Mi canción favorita, siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche, noche.
Forward a bit. That's the musical piece. Alright. So certain sections sound quite all right. Certain sections sound a bit too unbalanced. Okay, you will notice that the vocals are a bit too loud right now. Now this kind of a you know, balance still works while you're producing, but if you notice a few things, for example, if I play the song and notice my output levels on my master, okay,
Mi canción
it's already peaking to
favorita,
-1.
siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos
Okay, it's already peaking to -1, and 0 dB is our deliverable on the master. Okay, now it is very important that your output while you're mixing, okay, is not overall exceeding -6 dB, which means that this has to go down. And this is what a lot of people do. They'll just, you know, crank down the master, but that doesn't really help. Okay, what you really want to do is basically make sure that when you're playing the song back,
mi canción,
so instead of getting -1, your overall output is roughly around -6 dB. Okay, sometimes depending on the mix, depending on the kind of song it is, okay, for example, for a high energy song, I make sure that it's not exceeding actually -8, although 6 is the kind of the baseline. Okay, just so that I have headroom. It's all about headroom. Okay, because if I'm already getting a peak of -1 dB, that means I have 1 decibel room to play in the master, which means I really can't do much. If I slap on a compressor or anything like that, like right now I have a basic mastering plugin called Ozone by Isotope that does like an automatic mastering thing. That's just a quick thing. But when I actually get down to mastering a track, uh, you know I don't have enough headroom. So if I switch this off, you know
Mi canción
you see it's clipping
favorita.
now.
Siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí
Now
toda.
that's a big no-no. Reason being that you don't want any kind of clipping happening, not just on the master, but also throughout the track. So when you're producing, let's say for your grade 8 or your grade 7, you need to make sure that your gain staging is absolutely sorted. And if it's not during the time of production, while you're mixing, you need to sort it out. Okay? You need to address it. Because what's happening is, let's say, the next question, and it's a logical question, would be, but I don't hear any clipping. Okay, right? Because when I play it,
Mi canción
sure, it's
favorita.
clipping to 0.1, so it's going above 0 dB, but it's not that you're hearing distortion, right? Now the reason for that is that because we're using an audio interface right now, and interfaces usually have more headroom, right? But when you actually bounce it down, I can guarantee you that at least on some mediums, either it'll sound overcompressed. When you say overcompressed, another common word that you can use is when your music sounds too choked. That's another way to express overcompression usually. So just keep in mind that if something's sounding too choked, that means you've overcompressed it at some point, whether it's in the mixing or in the mastering. Okay, so when you're processing music, there are 3 stages to it. One is the pre-mix stage, as I like to call it. The pre-mix stage is all about setting your levels correct before you even touch EQ, before you even touch compression or any of those things. Okay, it's very important that before you even touch mixing, right, or attempt to mix a song, it should already sound good. Okay, now my issue with this particular session is it sounds fine even unmixed, right? I mean, you can make out what's going on, right? My issue is gain staging, which is why it's clipping. Okay, so that's something that needs to be addressed. Once you've addressed that, right, that's when you can proceed and start applying processing. Okay, now let's discuss how to go about it. Okay, so for example, okay, I'm gonna just have a look at give me a second. I'm just turning this into one take. Okay. Okay. So let's have a listen to the vocals first. Okay. Now, for anybody who's wondering how I did that, I just selected all of them, pressed Command J in Logic, and just create it, and it makes a consolidated clip. Okay. Now, for anybody who wants to know where I got these vocal samples, I got them from Splice. So these are royalty-free samples and vocal files. So you guys can also explore that website if you like, just to practice for your rock school and grades and everything, apart from doing the coursework tasks beforehand. Okay. So let's listen to just the first vocal. Okay, which is 1 second. I'm sorry. Okay.
Mi canción favorita. Siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí
Okay,
toda.
so when I play this, I'm always checking my metering. Okay, so
Mi canción
for example,
favorita.
this is my main vocal right now. It's I've set it very low. I'm going to put it back to 0 dB, and now see how loud it's going to be.
Mi canción favorita. Siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí.
So as you can see, what's happening is that I actually have automation running. That's why it's going down, but it's already at 1.7. Okay, so now there are 2 ways to do it. One is that I could just select the wave file, and I don't want it to actually exceed a level of around -10. I want that much headroom. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the region settings in Logic and reduce the gain for it from here. Okay, I'm going to push it down by, let's do 8, maybe. Yeah, and you could double click and just type -8, and you can see the overall volume or the energy of the track goes down. So now when I play it,
Mi canción favorita, siente tu calor, tú me haces
okay,
loco. Somos aquí toda la
and
noche.
I'm going to remove all the plugins so that I can start from scratch.
Mi canción favorita, siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche. Mi canción favorita, siente tu calor, tú
So as
me
you can
haces
see now I'm getting a clip level of -9, which means I have enough headroom to apply my processing, okay, as opposed to you know, 1 second guys, give me a second. Okay. Yeah, that's good. Okay. So, where did it go? 1 second. Okay. So now if I just have a listen to 1 second, let me delete this. It'll be easier for me.
Mi canción favorita, siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos
Yeah.
aquí toda.
So now when I listen to this track,
Mi canción favorita, siente tu calor, tú.
now I'm getting around -15. That's good actually, because I'm gonna start applying processing to it. Okay, so let's just hear it
Mi
in the.
canción favorita, siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche. Mi canción favorita.
Okay, now the issue lies that the clipping is happening because of the kick. Okay, so another way to kind of address it is that I'm gonna take.
Siddharth, we lost your audio.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Sorry, that was me. Sorry, my fault.
Okay, you can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So now what I'm going to do is the thing is, apart from, I have a lot of audio files here, audio samples. So I'm going to just select all of them. Okay, like that, just left click, drag, and I'm going to reduce the gain straight up by -10. Okay, let's see what happens. Okay, that's been
Mi canción favorita, siente tu calor, tú me haces loco.
So
Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche.
1 second.
Mi canción favorita, siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche.
And I'm going to take the piano because now it's applied to everything else except the piano, because the piano is a virtual instrument. So I'm going to just reduce it from here because it's a combined VST. It has a grand piano, a pad, everything. So I'm just going to reduce that. Okay.
Mi canción favorita,
Reduce the bass as well.
siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche.
Okay.
Mi canción favorita.
And let's address the kick as well.
Tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche. Mi canción favorita, siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí.
Okay. Now I'm going to look at the kick and the snap. Okay, these are here, and I'm going to reduce the gain further. Let's put it to -15. Okay.
Mi canción
Let's hear that section again with the kick.
Siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. La vida es un carrusel.
This section, sorry.
Siente tu calor, tú me haces
Yeah, much better.
Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda.
So all I'm doing is I'm just taking the samples and reducing the gain to my liking. Okay, so that already if you look at the, it's now clipping to -12.4 instead of 0.5. It's -12.4, right? Which means I have 12 decibels, 12 dB of headroom to play with. Okay, meaning that if I have to push the vocals up during automation or lower something, any instrument, I have headroom and nothing will clip. Okay,
Siente tu calor, tú me haces loco.
let's have a listen to the chorus as well and balance that out quickly.
Mi canción favorita.
Okay, now it's sounding unbalanced.
Siente tu calor,
So let's sort that out.
tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche. Mi canción favorita. Siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos
Now you could do it both ways. You can do it from by adjusting the gain, or you could do it from the fader as well, because I already have a bit of a rough balance sorted. So I'm just selecting all the faders and just like pushing them down a little to a point where I like the overall sound.
Mi canción favorita, siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche.
Now I feel this bass is a little louder, so I'm gonna just do it from the bass amp actually. From the output. The drums, of course, I'll reduce them a little.
Mi canción favorita, siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche.
So as you can see, overall, you need to keep checking metering of each of your tracks as well, okay? For example, this is a minus 27, this is a minus 17, minus 5.6. That's absolutely fine, okay? So,
Mi canción favorita, siente tu calor, tú me haces loco.
but do you see what happens that as soon as I went into, when the verse was playing, if you remember, we were getting a minus 15 dB output, right? But as soon as the chorus came,
Mi canción
we're getting minus 4.
favorita, siente tu calor, tú me haces loco.
And that's another thing. Always level to the loudest part of the song, okay? Which means our balance is a bit too loud right now, okay? So I'm going to select everything. And for now, just lower the faders.
Mi canción favorita, siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda.
See, now we're getting around minus 7. That's doable.
Mi canción favorita,
About 5.6.
siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche.
Awesome. Okay. Now, one thing is that, see, for the purpose of this masterclass, because we have a bit of a time constraint overall, so I've just taken the entire session and just used these faders to kind of, lower everything. Usually, okay, I would actually have all my faders set to 0 and get the gain staging sorted. Okay, now that's going to take longer, so I'm not doing that. But like right now, you see that, each fader is at a different level, right? What I ideally like to do is have all my faders flat 0 and have the premix sounding great with gain staging, and then I'll just select all of them and reduce them. Okay, so keep that in mind. Okay, but if you do it with this technique also, it's absolutely fine, because the purpose of a fader is also to control the volume, okay, and the overall output. So that's also absolutely fine. Okay,
Siddharth, we have
Yes.
a question saying
Yes.
what is the difference between ozone and neutron? So whenever you feel is an appropriate time to answer it, feel free.
Okay,
to that.
so ozone is primarily a product made by Isotope for mastering needs. Okay, it is something that you put at the end of your mix bus, okay, here on the master, or ideally in a new session once you've done mixing, okay, you can put on ozone and master. It's basically, it contains a series of processing such as EQ, imaging, compression, and limiting, and you can use those tools to master a track. Neutron is more of a mix tool. Okay, you've got tools such as saturation, of course compression is also there, but it caters more to mixing. Okay, now one good and a pathetic feature this has is what we call an auto master or an auto mix. For example, I'll show it to you. I can use the mastering assistant. It's analyzing audio. It'll set the levels automatically. See, it's automatically. Can everybody hear me? Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we
Yeah,
lost
yeah, yeah.
a minute.
No, I'm sorry. That was my fault. I had this on record enabled, so that's why. I'm so sorry about that. Okay, so coming back to Ozone, so it's a mastering plugin, okay, which has auto mastering in it. Now it's great when you have to like quickly send a bounce to somebody for reference, and you could just press the mastering assistant. Otherwise I would say always master and mix your tracks on your own. So Neutron is the same format plugin catering to mixing. Ozone is for mastering. That's the difference. Okay, moving on. So like I was saying that in an ideal scenario, all my faders would be at 0. Okay, now if you I can just show it to you, okay, just for a few tracks so that you guys have an idea. Okay, so let's look at the drums, for example. Okay, these are our drums. Okay, let's take these. Okay, and just for the sake of it, I'm gonna color them orange. In So all the orange tracks are our drums. Okay, and that's another thing, please color code your tracks even when you're sending it, no matter what grade you're in. Okay, now of course the earlier like the smaller like grade 1 2 3 4, I don't think they really require you to color code, but still do it. It's a good practice, because see, right now I can tell all my orange colored tracks are drums. It's that simple, right? So make your life easier. Okay, so as I mentioned that usually I would have every fader set to 0, right? So let's just quickly do that. Okay, I pressed option and left click and everything was set to 0. Now I'm gonna just solo these. Okay, sounds unbalanced, obviously. Okay, now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start with the kick. Okay, set the level for the kick first. Okay, it's absolutely fine, because see, I'm getting a peak of -17. That's absolutely fine. On the output 9.4, that's because of the thing. Let's hear it. See, yeah, -18. That's great. Okay, now I'm gonna add another kick. Now for example here, when I'm mixing also, see, without applying any plugins, see, these are empty, right? I don't like the way both the kicks balance out. Okay, I think this is a bit too loud for my taste, so I'm gonna just select that particular kick track and lower the gain a little bit. Hear it. See, that's more to my taste. Okay, and as you can see, I'm getting the balance of both the kicks without touching these two faders. Okay, then I'll move on to the next one. Now the snaps are obviously playing in the verses, not in the chorus. So the first thing I'm going to do is select that section. Okay, which is here. Okay, and now automatically I feel that the snap is not loud enough, so I'm going to increase it. Okay, that's fine. I'm getting my level, and it's not going above, like I said, -6 or -7 dB. It's at -8.6. Okay, moving forward. Okay, let's add the shaker now. Okay, I'm gonna just kind of like the level actually. I'm just reducing the reverb. I added a reverb to it. Yeah. Okay, that's good. Okay, and let's move forward. Okay, the snares now. Now here in the chorus I have 3 snares going on. Okay, there are 3 different samples, and the reason now another great question, I don't know if somebody thought of this, is can you just do with one kick, just one snare? Absolutely you can. Okay, it's not necessary to stack samples. Okay, the reason I'm doing that are for 2 reasons. Okay, one, if I just had one kick and one snare, right? Okay, both these particular samples are covering a particular frequency spectrum, okay? Which means that if I want them really loud, right, then those are the only two tracks I have control over, okay? So what I'm doing by adding more samples is that instead of increasing volume, because in dance music, usually the kick and the snare are very prominent, right? So instead of pushing those up, what I'm doing is I'm trying to fill out the frequency spectrum so that it sounds fuller. So the approach is make it be heard not with volume, but with added frequencies, okay? Because naturally, when you have, let's say, any sample, especially drums, that covers everything from your lower end to the higher end, it'll have more definition, it'll be more prominent, right? So that's the whole attempt with adding different samples. And of course, then what you can also do is that perhaps I could have a different blend during, let's say, the verses, where I don't want the snare to be very prominent or the drums to be very prominent, and then have a different blend of these sounds for the chorus, right? So let's just balance these out and you'll see the difference. Okay, so that's snare 1. I kind of like the level, and it's not peaking. See, it's going to around -13. I like that. Let's add snare 2. You see the difference, what's happening without it, with it. You get this focus with the as soon as I add snare 2 in the mid range. Let's hear it again. Right? Now, to get the same effect with just one snare sample, I would have to push it up to there, somewhere there, right? Meaning that not only am I eating up more of my headroom, because obviously the overall output went up, okay, but it doesn't sound the same. Like this pushed up versus with this sounds better, right? And of course, what I could do is, for example, in the verses, lower this with automation, do this, and then as soon as the chorus hits, I can make this 0 and it just pops up. Do you see? Without changing anything else, right? So it's easier. Okay. Now let's add, apart from that, I've also added a snare acoustic sample, and the reason is because when you add some acoustic elements, it sounds slightly more organic. That's about it, because these are quite processed samples, snare 1 and 2. So let's add snare acoustic sample. Let's hear that on its own. See, it's a normal snare, like an acoustic snare. Okay, and what I'm going to do is, let's hear it together. I like that. Maybe I can push up the acoustic snare maybe a little bit, just to get that crack of the snare. Yeah. Together they sound like this. As opposed to one snare, any sample, be it any sample, doesn't sound the same, right? But together, it has that presence that you might need without clipping, without anything. And that's what I was trying to, and let's just add the clap stack as well, so that, we're done with the drums quickly. See, now this is too loud. And on every fourth hit, I have a stack, a clap stack, apart from clap 1, just to add more emphasis. So let's hear that. Two, three, it came up now. And it doesn't have to be loud, okay? Nothing has to be too loud to make it sound great. See, so now that we have kind of gain staged the kick, the snare, and the snaps, and the hats, and the claps, you see everything is at flat on the faders, and I'm still getting a good level without touching any processing, correct? And I think that approach is great, because then you can just take the entire section. You know that you know your relative gain staging then on the fader. You know that when you lower it, they're all going to be in sync to your premix preferences. See, it still sounds the same, it's just lower in volume, right? Also, that right now you guys might feel that the snares are too loud as compared to the kicks, but once we're done processing, you will realize that it's pretty much sorted, because we're going to be taming the snare more than the kick when it comes to compression and things like that. Okay, so let's just hear the output levels of this group. One second, guys. Yeah. Okay, so we're getting -4 without any processing, without any compression. Now, as soon as I add compression to the snare, that's primarily happening. That -4 peak we're getting on the output is primarily because of the snares, because the snares are unchecked right now. Okay, if you notice, I remove the snares, mute them. See, I'm getting -12 now. But as soon as I put in the snares, straight away it shoots up by almost 8 dB. Okay, now there's a reason for that. Okay, because obviously the snares are a high transient instrument, which is why I kind of kept the kick low, because once I'm done compressing these will lower a little, not in volume but in their peaks, so they'll be absolutely perfect when the kick and the snares are all processed. Okay, any questions?
Nothing in the chat yet. But
Great.
people are really loving it. I can see some comments on the YouTube. There are a couple of people watching on
fantastic.
YouTube as well.
Oh, fantastic. Welcome, guys. So if you guys have any questions, please leave them in the chat section and we'll try to address as many as possible. Okay, so coming back to this now. Okay, so point is that if you take this approach right from the beginning, no matter what grade you're doing, okay, you will make your life easier. I mean, look at it. See, I mean, just look at the orange section, clean, as opposed to, let's say, this section over here, which is like kind of all over the place, and you're like, oh god, what's my actual gain stage? Do you see that? You know, even here, like for example, if I just solo these, right? So your aim should be that everything, all the faders are at 0. Okay, so I'm going to proceed now. How to start? So after you're done applying this concept to all your tracks, I'm not going to do it for all tracks to save time. Okay, then you'll end up with a session that's absolutely clean in the mix bus, in the mix window. Okay, which is all faders at 0, and you're already getting a decently sounding signal from your production. Okay, that should be your aim. Okay, and like I said, I can't stress enough, it sounds good. If I just turn on the master bus once, okay, check this guy, one second. Okay, I'm gonna let's just
Siddharth, may I request you to keep the mic close also?
Yes, let's just solo these, and I'm gonna turn on the mastering chain for a second. It sounds fine. Of course it'll sound better from now. Okay, that's our aim. But don't have this approach that a lot of people have, that, oh, I'm going to fix it in the mix. Okay, because it doesn't happen. Okay, and this is the time, you know, before you even start mixing. For example, if you feel, let's say, a snare sample or a kick sample or a hi-hat sample is not sounding good, okay, don't assume that it will sound better after mixing. Change it right now. Right now is the time to change it. Okay, so for example, if I did not like my kick sample, let's say kick 2, I would actually replace it at this point, at the pre-production stage, pre-mix stage rather. Okay, so now let's start with what's the next step. Okay, now usually when you're doing a song or any production, I usually like to start with the drums, the percussions, then go into the bass. Okay, then do everything from keys to guitars and, you know, everything that has a lot of mid-range information. Okay, and finally do the vocals. But for certain songs, for certain busy mixes, I also like to start with vocals. Reason being, that a lot of pop songs, the vocals are the key element. Okay. And in pop songs, usually, okay, I'm not talking about genre specific songs, okay, but let's say pop as a genre, in terms of it's a mixture of funk, R&B, hip hop, right? Those are the main key genres, right? Now, what do you hear the most? The most significant instrument in all those productions are actually synthesizers and keyboards, right? Even the bass that you hear is not actually a bass guitar most of the times. It's actually a synth bass derived from a keyboard, right? Now, a keyboard or a synthesizer is one of the most full ranged instrument. Ritesh is a fantastic keyboard player, he can tell you, right? And what's the challenge is there is to not to balance out synth patches, but balance them out in relation to the vocals, because they kind of have the same spectrum, right? So that is key, that you need to balance your mid-range really well, like I said before. Okay. So for example, if it's a hip hop track that I'm doing, I always start with drums and bass and the 808s. Reason because the bass and the low end is very important in hip hop. Okay. If it was a jazz track, I wouldn't really worry too much about, oh, how much low end am I getting, but more about, can I hear every instrument clearly? Does every instrument, be it a trumpet or a saxophone or a Fender Rhodes, or let's say an a cappella, have the space in the stereo mix that it requires, that everything is audible, So your approach to music will differ based on the genre. Okay. Now this is a bit of a poppy track, but it still has some acoustic elements. Okay. So we're going to approach it in a hybrid way. Okay. But as far as our drum section goes in this, it has to be punchy. It has to be in your face. So let's start by addressing, let's say, the kicks. Okay. Now, there are two ways to it. Now, one of the things that we have to also cover is parallel compression, and I'm going to get to that now in some time. But let's address the kicks first, okay? Now, a lot of times what happens is, because, even if you have two kick samples in your session, a lot of people just process one kick and then just copy, paste all the plugins on the other one, thinking kick to kick hai, they think a kick is a kick. But our aim here is, now the reason I had two kicks here is that I want the subs, the bass, the body of the kick to come from kick one, which is this, okay? And the mid-range or the attack to come from this one, which means that my aim should not be to boost the same set of frequencies in the EQ for both kicks. It has to be different. And then I have to check the relation. The other thing is that when you are stacking things like kicks and snares, each time you add a new sample, you need to check the phase. Very important. Okay. I've already checked the phase. They're in phase. Okay. But if you invert the phase in Logic or Ableton, okay, what you are looking for audibly is that use the setting in which there's more bass. Okay. Because when you have two samples that are out of phase, it results in some kind of a low end cutoff. Okay. Because both the sine waves are kind of intermingling and you're kind of out of phase and things like that. So you don't want that. So very important is to keep checking phase. Even when you're recording live drums or live instruments, if any of you have experience in the studio when we're doing multi-mic techniques, because when we have, let's say, a kick drum mic, two snare drum mics, overheads, right? The first thing we do is, after checking each microphone, we need to check if each microphone is in phase with the other, in relation to the other mic. Otherwise, it'll almost sound like you have a phaser effect on your guitars or on your drums or stuff like that. So the same approach, think of it as two kick drum mics rather than two kick samples. That's very important. So once you've sorted that out, let's just solo kick one. Okay. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is, now, usually, for some people who have gone to music production school or audio engineering school, usually, I think there's a processing chain that everybody's taught. Oh, compression comes first, then EQ, or perhaps, let's say, if it's in a live drums scenario, then, oh, you'll put a gate first, then a compressor, then an EQ, so on and so forth. But it really depends on the purpose. Now, for example, here, I'm actually not going to apply a lot of compression to the kick because I want the kick to pop out. So the first thing I want to do is add an EQ to it, okay? And so let's just, and I'm going to use all stock Logic plugins so that you guys can emulate this. Also, if anybody wants this session, I'll make this available with Ritesh and you guys can download it, okay? So let's put on a channel EQ, okay? And the first thing is that before you start touching and fiddling around with things, let's just hear it, okay? And see the visuals. Now, clearly I can see that there's a bit of a peak around that 35, 33 Hertz. There's a bit of a peak around 90 Hertz here. There's a dip around 60, okay? And there isn't a lot of, like, of course, there's a bit of attack around the high mids and some air around the 8K mark. That much I already know, okay? But what I want is, if you hear the kick sample very clearly, there's this low end aftershock that's happening after each attack. It kind of goes almost like a vacuum, low end vacuum sound. Listen to it carefully. Right? It's almost like the coil is, in the speaker is kind of moving forward and backward, that kind of thing. That just usually means that there's a bit of too much of the sub information. I want to clean that up. And that's the thing. Start by cleaning up your samples, not by boosting things, okay? Boosting usually is more of for character and cutting things through. But right now we need to clean this up. So the first thing I want to do is put a bit of a high pass, okay? A steep one, okay? And I'm going to just put it up to, let's say, 30 Hertz, okay? Now, you won't hear the difference on headphones right now, I can guarantee you that. But you would feel the difference on big reference monitors, I can guarantee you that as well, okay? Like if you go to a professional studio, you can hear the difference feel the difference rather, okay? In how the lower end is responding, okay? Okay, and after that, I'm gonna just cut off a bit of that around that 40 Hertz. You could do it with the high pass too. Do you hear, can anybody hear that difference? I can. With it, without it, right after the kick hits, there's this low end boom that's happening without the EQ. But as soon as I apply it, it's not happening. I can hear it. I hope you guys can too. Without it, with it. In case you're not able to hear it, that's absolutely fine. You'll have the session available. Just unmute and mute it and you'll hear that slight difference. Of course on headphones, not on laptop speakers. Listen to it on headphones at least, okay? Now the next thing you want to do is I'm going to tighten the low end itself a little more, okay? So I'm going to boost it now for a second. Now you can hear each frequency and I'm going to tighten the Q a little. Now what I'm really doing is scanning for frequencies, okay? Seeing, is there something off with the low end, or is there a particular fundamental frequency that I like, that I feel I can boost, okay? Usually to get more subs, you are looking at about 60 Hertz and 80 Hertz, okay? To push up, okay? To get that really nice low end. If you want more of that, chest thumping kind of kick sound, you're looking at boosting a little bit of that 40, 45 Hertz, 80 Hertz, and even about 100. If you want to clean up the lows, there are these basics, frequencies that you can address, like 125 usually we lower if it's sounding a bit muddy or something like that. But let's see, it depends from sample to sample. So let's just hear that. See this frequency now, it's actually 83 is kind of annoying me. So I'm going to just lower that a little bit and make the Q really tight. And it's, I think, lowered by just 2 dB, but it makes a difference. Okay. Now, again, I'm going to scan for frequencies. Okay. Make the Q a little tight. Okay. See, that's annoying me. Okay. I'm going to lower that too. I like that. I feel it needs a bit more mids. Okay, so let's. Yeah, Yeah, I kind of like that. So I'm just gonna boost it up. Not that much is enough because it's a fairly wide cue. Maybe low. Yeah. And now I want some definition. Attack. Now that I want that frequency to be boosted, but not so much. So I'm gonna lower it, and I'm also gonna put a low pass. Now the reason I'm doing that is that you will notice a considerable difference in the top end of the kick. Without it, you might feel that right now it's sounding dull, but what I'm really doing is leaving that 8K onwards space really for vocals, for vocal air and vocal reverb effects and things like that, and hi-hats and stuff. Because if you boost everything and have everything available on every particular instrument, then it's going to be a hodgepodge basically, right? So EQ is a nice way to carve out a sound. Okay, it's like carving something. Okay, you're chiseling it, refining it. Okay, and as you can see that I have increased whatever I've boosted, it's not above 2.5 dB. See, 2.4 on the high end, it's about 1.8. Okay, and I think a lot of people have this misconception that, oh, you can push it up minus, +6 and +12. I've seen those kind of curves as well. If you're doing that, that means, like I said, go back to the basics, replace your sample, get a better sample, so that you have, because again, it's all about headroom, right? If you're going to push up, let's say 456 hertz by like 10 dB, that means you don't have any headroom to address that frequency in other things either. It'll start clipping, right? So just this much difference, dipping off a particular frequency by 3, of course here it's minus 9.4, but it's a very gradual slope to clean up the low end, right? So that is doable. But if you notice the difference between these two now, bypassed versus with EQ, let's hear that. Okay, and I'm going to turn it on. So you will notice that the high end sizzle of the kick is gone. But it sounds more focused, tighter, right? Okay. Now I'm ready to apply some kind of compression to it. Okay. Now, usually when we're talking about kicks, I do 3 things: EQ, compression, and saturation. A lot of people don't know the power of saturation. Okay. And even because what it's doing is it's basically making your signal hotter. Okay, but not really pushing it up by volume. Okay, that's the difference. So we're going to address that as well. But right now, let's start. So now that we're done with EQing, let's apply compression to the kick. Okay. Now this is a very subtle thing, because if you apply too much compression to a kick drum, it'll sound flat, it'll sound dead. It's almost like beating a cardboard, plank or a cardboard box with a stick. It shouldn't sound like that. It should sound nice and transient and full sounding, right? So I'm gonna take just a stock compressor. Okay, let's just start. Now the first thing I do, at least in Logic, is before I even touch anything, I'm going to go through all these different types of compressors available. Okay, I'm not even going to look at the whatever presets they have, because presets are meant, they've made these presets keeping in mind certain sounds, right? Now you can of course use them as a reference. You can tweak presets in the beginning, it's absolutely fine. But I would say always trust your ears more than a preset. Okay, and that should always be your aim as a mix engineer or as a producer, right? So because you might have a different sound, and maybe even my best settings or a professional's best settings won't apply to your reference. So keep that in mind. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is select what kind of character I like, because these are modeled after different actual real hardware compressors. Okay, so they'll have a different character to each one of them. So This one sounds louder. That doesn't mean it's actually better. It just sounds louder, that's all. I actually like that. Even I reduce the makeup because it's automatically making the kick, the low end, it's responding to the low end slightly better. So I'm going to keep this. Now, the first thing is that a kick has a very tight attack, a very fast attack. Okay. Now, I have a question. How many of you want me to explain what compressors are? Even if there's like 3 or 4, let me know. Just raise your hand in the chat or something.
Everyone, feel free to switch on your videos or unmute yourself and talk to Siddharth and give a visual cue like a thumbs up or something like that.
Yes, because if you guys know what a compressor is, then I'll move forward with the settings of how. If you guys don't know, then I would probably tell you what each of these settings are and how to kind of take care of them.
Kingsley says, please explain, sir.
Okay, so that's even just one is enough because compressors are tricky and the most misused plugin or hardware available out there. Okay, so I'll ask one more question. I need, how many people think that compressors are used to control volume? Just say yes or no.
Show of hands or some comments on the chat will help.
So nobody thinks that, right?
Yeah.
I am very impressed. Thank you so much. Yeah. So, like I said, they're not used for controlling volume. I've heard a lot of people say that. Okay. They are basically tools to control dynamic range of any instrument or one second, guys. Yeah. Any instrument, they are controlling the dynamic range. What is the dynamic range? The loudest peak and the most minute sounding, the quietest peak in any sound source, meaning the loudest section and the most quietest section. The difference between that is your dynamic range. Okay, the high point and the low point. Okay, so what compressors do is they try to balance those, make them come closer. How? They bring up the lower dynamic range information up, and of course squash a little bit of the top end and try to balance it out. Okay, so compressors are a blessing for things like keyboards, pianos, vocals, of course, you know. Now they can be a blessing for drums or a nightmare for drums. Why? Let me explain. Okay, now before I do that, let's get into the settings of what these things are really doing. Okay, the threshold, the ratio, makeup, attack, release, these are the 5 major settings that are available in every compressor. Okay, be it a hardware or be it a software VST plugin like this one. Okay, so now let's talk about the threshold. Okay, the threshold is basically where, at what level will the compressor get triggered. Okay, when will it start acting, okay, or turn on. So what you're supposed to do is rotate the knob and see, you can see it started working at about minus 12 dB. Whatever it, even if it's a little bit, it's working. Okay, so that is my threshold. That means that's where my compressor will start compressing. Okay, now based on this, now of course at minus 12 it's just touching the peak of the kick. Okay, if I wanted the entire sound wave to be compressed, I would have to lower the threshold, right? Meaning this. See, now it sounds really bad, but it's because it's covering the entire transient range, but we don't want that. Okay, so that's what a threshold's for. Okay, at what point will the compressor get triggered? Okay, now let's talk about attack and release. Attack is how fast will the compressor latch on to that sound wave and compress it. Okay, how fast or how slow. Okay, so for example, if it's really fast, and let me see, as soon as the kick hits, it starts acting. Whereas if I made it very slow, see, it's not really doing much, because one, the kick is a very high transient instrument, it's very quick, right? But that's what attack is for. How fast will the compressor latch on to the sound source? Okay, release is for how long the compressor will be latching on to that sound for. Okay, a release, for example, a faster release means that the compressor will compress and back off. A faster release, a slow release means it'll compress and then kind of go back slowly, more gradually. Okay, now they both have their uses, of course, depending on what you're compressing. Okay, now the third thing, I'm going to get to ratio, but is this makeup gain. Usually when you're compressing, what happens is that because you're squashing the dynamic range, as a result, the perceived volume of the compressed signal goes down. Okay, so a lot of people tend to use this as a gain knob. Oh, I want things louder, let me crank it up. That's not what it's for. What it's for is that, for example, when you compress something, let's say we compress this. Okay, you'll notice as soon as I turn it off, it's louder, but as soon as the compressor kicks in, it's softer, right? So the makeup is to make up for the lost gain, lost volume. So I want it to be equivalent to how it sounded bypassed. See, now it kind of sounds the same, maybe touch less. Okay, so the makeup gain is really used to volume match before and after. Okay, now let's get to the ratio. Okay, now ratio is basically how many times, okay, will the compressor act on the sound wave. A 1:1 means it'll apply the compression once and then back off. Okay, based on the transient response of the sound wave and everything, it depends on that. Okay, and if you increase that, okay, that means, for example, the ratio is 5:1. Okay, that means it's latching on to the sound with that ratio in mind, meaning that it's faster. Okay, so now a lot of people tend to kind of confuse that just because I'm saying faster means that it's similar to attack. No, another way to put it is that the intensity, let's put it that way, the intensity of the compression is based on the ratio. For example, I might have a heavy compression. For example, our kick drum was peaking at about -12, right? So I'm gonna put this to 2. Let's just hear that, right? It's barely triggering, right? Now if I, let's say, increase the ratio and okay, so what's happening is it's actually applying more compression. But let's do one thing, let's make it an extreme setting, then you can hear the difference. See what's happening now? It's on full threshold. Now I'm going to reduce the ratio from full to less. In other ways, the combination of the threshold and the ratio can do two things. Okay, one is I can have less ratio and basic threshold and have the compressor trigger a little bit, or maybe I want to compress the entire dynamic range of the wave and have more threshold, right? So meaning this much, but then it sounds too over compressed, right? So then I could lower the ratio, meaning that I'm covering more dynamic range of the sound wave and I can control that without it sounding over compressed, as opposed to just chopping off the top end by having less threshold, if that makes sense. Okay, so the combination of 1, 2, 3 and 4, meaning threshold, ratio, attack and release, will give you the ideal results or the not so ideal results. Okay, it's the combination of these. Okay, now in the case of a kick drum, because the transient itself is very fast, okay, now there's a few things I want to keep in mind. I don't want to have an ultra fast attack because I want the attack of the kick, right? Because what's the point of having a fast transient response on a kick drum which gives us that thump of a kick, right? And then just chopping it up with a very fast attack. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have it still fast, not extremely slow, but not like extremely quick. So let's put it about 5, 6, let's put it at 6 milliseconds. Okay, start there. And with the kick drum, I don't want to go beyond minus 3 dB. Personally, I don't like to. Okay, maybe minus 5 if it was a rock track. Okay, which means this meter is telling you how much is it compressing. Okay, so let's hear that. And I want a very fast release as well, extremely fast, so that it just compresses a little bit, tames the kick a little bit, doesn't change the character of it. And I'll show you what it does actually. Okay, you'll already notice a difference in the metering here. Okay, let's see. Let's turn this on. Okay, 1 second. Okay, that's good enough for me. Let's see the difference now in the output. Okay, so with just that much, it's reducing around 3 dB. Okay, what I ended up doing was I have the same output in terms of volume, but my gain, the output gain, was reduced from 15.7 to 16.9. That's the difference. Okay, so I created more headroom for my kick in the context of the mix. Okay, and yet tamed the kick's transient response just a little bit, so that it doesn't like really just hit you in the face completely. Okay, and when I actually mix it with the rest of the tracks, it'll sound more in line. It's not that the kick will just suddenly pop out. Okay, and that's the thing, like that you don't have to do a lot just to get good results. A lot of mixing is always about subtlety, so always aim for subtlety. Okay, now I might change this setting a little bit later when I hear it with the rest of the stuff, but at least for kicks, I'm not really going for a very ultra compressed sound because it doesn't make sense. Okay, should I move on? Any questions?
Just to remind you, we are 1 hour 15 minutes into the session now.
Okay, yes, I'll
Keep
now
it.
yeah, of course, yeah. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is now I'm gonna compress and mix one snare for you. Rest is pretty much, you guys can also kind of experiment on your own and everything. So let's blend kick 2 first. Okay, now here I'll quickly EQ it. Add more air here maybe. And this is very quick, of course. Okay, it's just to make it settle with kick 1. Yeah, okay. Now let's look at the snare. Okay, here I'm going to start with the compressor. Now here, because the transient is very sharp, I'm going to have a fast attack. Okay, and a slow release because it's the kind of sound of this particular snare. I might do it differently for the acoustic snare, but I like this sound more. So and I'm just matching the output to the input. Okay, and a quick EQ, high pass, and I'm just trusting my ears right now, and it's very quick, not very surgical, but and I want a bit of the crack sound, which is the high mids. Yeah. That's good. Lower the output. I can do it from the EQ as well. And if I like to check with the limiter as well, like what's going on. 1 second, let me just. So now I feel the kick is too loud, so I'm gonna just lower that with the fader. Yeah. Okay. And so on and so forth. I'll do this for every track. Okay. But it's always compression, EQ compression first. Okay. And of course another thing is that a lot of people start adding reverb to everything. Okay, I usually like to keep a lot of stuff dry except for maybe hi-hats and snares, and of course snaps and things like that, okay. If for example I was doing a band mix, then I would probably have one reverb bus, okay, so that it sounds like they're all performing in one room. That's to simulate that environment. Okay, but usually I like to have most of my drums quite dry except for snares, certain snares. Okay, or for example in this case I have 3 snares, so it's not necessary that I'll apply reverb to all 3 of them. So let's just quickly do snare acoustic as well, and I'll balance out snare 2 with it. Let me just quickly make snare 2. It'll take us 1 minute, might as well. Okay. Now, as you can see in this particular one, I'm not making the attack really fast, because if I just make the similar settings in every snare, then I think by the end of it, it'll start sounding too squashed. So that's another thing, that don't approach each sound just because it's a snare doesn't mean that you'll treat it the same way as the previous track. Go by what you're hearing, okay, and use your hearing to judge whether you want a faster attack on the compressor or a slower attack, things like that. Okay, and how they kind of merge together as well, since I have multiple samples here. Okay. Here I kind of like the fact that if I have more threshold, it's kind of helping the compressor, the snare sustain a little more. It has more body, so that's why I'm applying more threshold here. Okay, and here on this one I might add some reverb. Let's just add Malhela. Of course not that, but even this is helping it sound thicker, right? Yeah, that's good enough. So it's a very short reverb, almost like a delay, but without it. Now with it. Okay, and now that I've added the reverb, now you can add this onto a bus. You can add this in the end. The reason I've added it first is because I know it's an integral part of the sound. So now I'm going to EQ it, because obviously as soon as you add reverb, you get more high end, right? So I'm just going to tame the high end a little bit. That's all. That brightness. Yeah. Now, of course, it's too loud, so just, yeah. Yeah. And maybe lower it a little now. Yeah. Without processing, sounds like that. With it, completely different, right? But together, it's adding that attack and the snap and the expansiveness of the verb in a controlled way, right? So that's how you'll start approaching each of these instruments and take it step by step. Okay. For sake of the time, I'm just blending in the acoustic snare sample. So we kind of have our drums ready now, okay? And that's the way to kind of approach it. And as you can see, we're already 1 hour into the session, 1 hour 30 minutes, and we've just covered 6 tracks, not even 6, 5 tracks. So it's a lengthy process, okay? Ritesh, can we just take a 2-minute break?
Yeah, definitely.
In the meanwhile, what we can do is you can collect some questions and we'll just sort that out if that's okay. And if any one of you want to take a quick break, you guys can do that. I have to charge my laptop, actually, that's why.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, I'll just put in the charger and we'll start in like 2 minutes. Okay.
So one thing that Siddharth did not give me the time to talk about is about Siddharth. So he just came in and started the session right away. So those of you who have already met Siddharth in the previous sessions, you already know who he is, but let me just introduce him formally in the middle of the session. He has done his, he's a Pro Tools 201 certified from Adam Smith College in UK. So he's done his schooling in music production in UK. And he's a fantastic guitar player and a bass player, a phenomenal musician. I played with him as well in his band. He goes by the name Stereo Buddha, or Stereo Siddharth. It's Stereo Buddha, I think, on the social media. So you'll see him there. And he's also the academic consultant for music production with RSL India team. So he's not the UK academic support, but he's the India academic support. And just to let you know that we have purposely not used the stems that come with the coursework task in the exam in the books, because then you would literally have a ready session with you. So 60% of your exam is done. So that's purposely we have not used it. It's also the confidential information. So Siddharth was very kind enough to source this open samples and work with them. But everything that he's covering is what you would need to know to do your grade 6, 7, and 8 exams with Rockschool. So feel free to post your questions on the chats, and we'll post it to Siddharth. Siddharth?
All right, guys, I'm back. So any questions, or should I proceed?
No questions as yet, so I think.
Okay, I hope you guys are not getting bored. That's why there are no questions.
They were getting bored, they won't be here.
Fair enough.
Enjoying it. So.
Fantastic. Okay, guys. So let's just begin. I'm just sorting out my charging. Okay. So just like we have kind of addressed each of these what do you say, tracks, that's how you're going to approach everything, including bass, for example. Let's just quickly cover bass now. Okay. Now in Logic, you'll notice that a lot of times it comes with the bass amp and the compressor and all those settings already kind of punched into it, right? Now you can use that as a reference point, or you can just get rid of those and start your own. I kind of like the way the fingerstyle bass sounds. That's what's been used here, but I might modify it. So let's just listen to it. First thing is too loud. See, that was my point. See, as soon as you turn on the compressor here, because I've already changed my gain staging, it's not even getting triggered. I always like the FET version. Now, another thing is, since if you remember that, 1 second, guys, please excuse me. Yes, it's charging now. Yes, sorry about that. Okay, so another thing is that if you talk about drums as well as bass, right, what's common among them? Let's think about it logically. One, of course, this frequency spectrum is similar, not exact, but it covers a similar frequency spectrum, especially the kicks and the bass guitar, right? The other thing is that the transient information, the attack, is similar, right? Because when you're listening to a bass, because kicks, bass, and drums are more about feeling, right? You feel if it's sounding great, rather than you don't approach it melodically, right? So you have to keep that in mind when you are balancing out bass along with drums as well. Okay, keep that in mind. So the first thing, without even looking at what the track needs, the bass track, I know that I had used an extremely fast attack setting and a very fast release setting on the kick, okay, which is the greatest competitor the bass guitar has as far as frequencies go, correct? So now this is just me, okay? It's not that you can't use other settings, but I like to keep that in mind, okay? So I'm going to avoid using similar settings, basically. That's what I'm trying to get at, okay? Let's hear it now. Now here, because my bass notes, even if they're MIDI, some are more longer, there's more sustain. So I'll actually go for like a really slow release, okay? Let's start at 1 o'clock. Also, just a quick tip, like if you guys don't know what attack and release settings you want, just point the attack at 11, release at 1, and that's a good place to start, in my opinion, okay? And then of course you can tweak it, okay? But when you have it at these positions, you'll kind of get an idea about what they do and what kind of threshold and ratio settings you might want to apply, okay? Now here I want the bass to be, of course, prominent in transients, but I kind of want it to be buttery smooth, okay? Because already there's a lot of so-called clickiness happening with the kick, right? There's a duck, duck, duck. It's a very busy kick programming that I've done, right? So simple. So I want the bass to be slightly buttery on top. Smooth is the word, okay? So let's hear it. As soon as I made the attack really fast, the transient goes away, right, of the bass, as opposed to, right? Like the first hit of every bass note, it just doesn't sound as prominent. So I'm not going to have a very fast attack. I'm probably going to have a medium attack. The other thing is, if you guys are not sure, like what I'm trying to judge with the release time right now is because I have some staccato notes and some legato style notes, right? So what I'm not worried about the staccato because the attack I know is not over compressing and the threshold is also fine. What I'm worried about is how does the release time react to the legato notes, which happen every alternative, okay? See that one. See, so point being that as soon as I increase the release, those legato notes start sounding a bit squashed. So which means I'm going to have a slightly faster release time as well. Okay. That's how I'm judging what settings to go for. It's not written in any book. That's just my approach. And your approach can be similar as well. Okay. And if you're too afraid to touch these settings, there's an auto mode for release. You can press that. But if you notice, even in the auto mode, the settings I put for the release, they're kind of similar in the way the VU meters are being applied. See, this is without the auto setting on the release. Look at the movement of the needle. Now I'm going to apply auto. Okay. It's reacting similarly, although this one's slightly slower. Okay. But still, I'm going to stick to my settings. Okay. I like that. Okay. So that's step one. Okay. Now let me show you one more technique for bass. Okay. This is something I really like to do. Now let's say, now bass is a very, what do you say? It's a very defined instrument, but sometimes when you have melodic sections, you know, on the bass guitar as well, you can apply effects to it as well. It's not a problem. Okay. So I'm going to remove that echo and those pedals. Let's solo the bass. Okay. Let's go into modulation. Just try a spreader. So I just took the factory spreader and what I did was just added that as a default setting and just blended it in maybe 10-15%. What this does is basically it makes the high end slightly wider. So it doesn't affect your low end in the center image of the bass, but it kind of expands or spreads the top end of the bass, so it sounds slightly wider, right? You can hear that difference even with, let's say, 12%. I'm going to switch this off. Now with it. There. It's kind of just moving it a little bit. You can do a similar technique with even flanger or chorus. Okay. For example, with chorus. I love chorus on bass, by the way. So I like to add it a lot. Now the dimension mode is a bit too much, but rate is fine. Intensity maybe a little, yeah. Just thickens up the bass a little bit. Doubt it? With it. See? You can hear the difference, right? Subtle, but it's there. So you could put a chorus, you can even put a phaser on it, you know. Although if you're putting a phaser, I would say duplicate the track and blend it in. Okay. So now that we have compression and a modulation source on the bass amp, I'll start modifying maybe the bass amp itself. Change it to a flip top maybe. Sounds brighter. I mean, this is a very Music Man bass sound. I like that. And that's another thing. Even with bass guitars, your definition of notes and punch comes from the mid-range. Of course, because bass is all about feeling, right? The low end. But you need to keep in check how the mid-range is on your bass guitar as well. Okay, so as soon as now that I've made it more mid-heavy, you'll see it'll cut through better with the kick. Right? I'll lower the volume a little bit in relation to the kick. Yeah, much better. Let's add EQ. Now, when I'm EQing the bass, I'm doing it while hearing the kick and the drums. Okay? Because I wanted to play next to those instruments, right? So I normally don't like to solo them, but EQ them in relation to the other stuff. Okay? And I would recommend that you do both. Okay? Start by cleaning up. I just make this as practice to just kind of put a high pass, even if it's a little bit, just so that if there is anything that I'm not able to hear, it gets cleaned up. Now here, instantly I know it's sounding nice on the mid-range, but I need that slight bump in the low end somewhere so I feel it a little more. Okay, so I'm going to take this particular thing and again just sweep it. This one. 76 Hertz. Just push it up a little bit. And here also, I think. I like that. And some more definition in the mids or the high mids. I like that, yeah. The other thing I'll do is add maybe a bit of distortion and try to blend that in. Okay, let's add an overdrive instead. This sounds cleaner, of course, without it. This sounds fatter. Okay. The other thing I could do is this is a very popular technique these days and you can use it. See, right now what's happening is that the compressor is triggering up, it's reacting to the bass notes, right? What I could do is a technique called side chaining. Okay, side chaining is basically when you want the compressor to be triggered by another instrument or another source. So here what I'm feeling is that overall the frequency spectrum of the bass is sounding nice. It's not, you can hear the notes, it's nice and punchy. But I feel that on the first transient, the first hit of every kick and the bass, there's a bit of, overlap happening. So what I'm going to do is when you open up your compressor, be it this one or fab filter or anything like that, you have an option to sidechain it, meaning that right now it says sidechain internal. I'm going to go there, go to audio, and use kick as the source. So what that does is that each time the kick plays, the bass gets compressed, other times it doesn't. Okay, so what that allows us to do is hear the kick, the first hit of every kick, more clearly, because as soon as the kick comes, the bass gets pushed back. Correct? So as opposed to versus, it's a very subtle difference, but it'll make a huge difference to this particular mix. Okay, so I'm going to do that. Now you can sidechain anything with anything. Okay, I can have, for example, the hi-hats, let's say, which are running in a quarter, sidechain a synthesizer. I can do all that. Okay, and be free to do that. Okay, so let's hear it now. Yeah, I like that. Okay, see, now it sounds, the rest of it sounds horrible because we started addressing everything, right? And that's the thing, that if you take that step-by-step approach, eventually everything will start sounding great, you know, and you need to have patience. Okay, that's the thing. So let's just listen to this. Let's add the guitars. Already I know they're too loud, so again I'm going to take these, reduce the gain, okay. Now what's the problem with the guitars? The groove is groovy, of course, the rhythm is groovy, but it's too flabby. I think it can be tighter, right? So let's listen to the wah loop. Okay, straight away I'm going to start with EQ. Yeah, that was nice. A little bit that attack. See how much I've cut. Before, after. Right? Maybe allow a bit of the lows. Huge difference. But the truth is that I need the funk, the so-called funk, the rhythm of the guitar. I don't need that bass. I have the bass guitar for that. I have the kick drum for that. I have the drums for that. Why do I need that extra flabby bottom end of the guitar that is useless? You know? So as you can see, the first thing, that the most basic EQ, that even if you don't want to do a lot of EQing, is by, if you just clean up the lows and the highs based on what instrument you're kind of treating, you'll already get something that sounds focused, you know. This opposed to, now because these are funk guitars, now funk has a particular sound which is compressed with a fast attack, you know, very Daft Punk. So we're gonna try to get that sound, you know. If you've heard songs like Get Lucky, you know, those kind of songs, so we're gonna try to achieve that. Okay, so let's add a compressor again. Okay, and like I said, this could be before or after, but here's what my approach is. If I had put the compressor before, right, it would be compressing all the frequencies. Am I correct? But since I have already cut out the frequencies that I don't require, so now the compressor is working less hard, so to speak, and only catering to the mids and the high mids. which are the frequencies I want, so it doesn't have to worry about all this information. So that's what I'm really doing. That's why the compressor is coming second here. Okay, if it was a guitar take that was much more fuller, maybe I would put the compressor first. It really depends on the context. Acoustic guitars, definitely I would probably put the compressor first, because it's a much more full sounding thing. Electric guitar, maybe not. Okay, so let's compress this. Let's go to an opto because it's more transparent. Optical compressor. So what I'm really trying to do is just tame that that first attack, right? And rest is fine because a lot of it is palm muting, right? And sometimes electric guitars tend to sound overcompressed, and in that case you can always blend the compressed signal with the original. Right now it's at 100% compression, and that's another trick. I could compress it more and then lower the mix of the compressor with the original signal. So let's do that. Right, so now you can hear it's really compressing it hard. Without it, but you notice one thing. As soon as I turn on the compressor, the noise level comes up, because what it's doing is also bringing up the lower end of the dynamic spectrum, right? So that's something to be aware of, that a lot of times when you put heavy compression, you might get noise as a result, because there is a noise bed in every recording. It just depends where it is. Okay, so we want to avoid that, which means our threshold's too much. So that's good. Yeah. Let's hear it with the bass. Yeah. Now this next thing I want to do is add some delay, just for some movement. Okay, delays are, I think, a great effect. I'm going to add a stereo delay, stock Logic, and I'm going to stereo link them so that the left and the right channel are exactly the same. I'm just going to experiment. So right now what's happening is that by default the left channel is running at quarter notes, okay, and these are 1/8, right? So let's hear, let's just hear that. Too much, right? But here's the trick. Before you start touching the output mix, there's an option here to carve out what frequency spectrum you want to delay. Right now what's happening is that it's delaying the exact copy of your original signal, right? But what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the lows up to, let's say, 100 hertz to begin with, and cut the highs as well to, let's say, 7, right? Let's hear that now. So you will notice that, when this was full spectrum, the delay was interfering with the original signal of the guitar. You don't want that to happen. You want the delay to sound expansive, not like a mess, basically, right? You want it to be controlled, but yet have that effect. So let's just experiment with the EQ curve. Also, that if you want that, typical analog delay effect, then it's a good technique to kind of just cut the highs, I like that. That's a delay effect. I'm going to lower it. It's just to make it a little wet. That's it. Okay, so 16% for me is good enough without it. With it, just makes it slightly wider. Okay, let's hear with drums.
Somos aquí.
I'm just gonna add the percussion. Compressing the percussion a little bit. Fast attack, fast release. That bongo hit to be slightly more prominent, that's why I'm just pushing up the. Let's auto analyze it just so it's louder. Yeah, better. Okay, now let's look at the piano. Love that sound. Now these are already set here. I EQ'd them in the last class, but I'm going to redo it because now we've EQ'd the rest of the stuff. So let's start with compression now this time. Now I want that attack of the piano keys, so which is why I'm having a slow attack here, okay? I like that, you know. Play. 1 second, guys. Yeah. Now all I want to do is, I like that full sounding piano. I just want to clean up the low mids a little bit. That's it, and maybe the lows. The rest I think was pretty nice. What do you say, Ritesh? I mean, you're the keys man.
I think the bass notes are like way too low.
Exactly.
The arrangement itself is way too low.
Yeah, and that's another thing that that's just my production thing. I like to always add like an octave lower of just the root note. Just to add some depth, and that's another thing, because I'm not a pianist, so I don't think like a pianist, right? So basically when I'm writing chords on the piano, I'm not really thinking, oh, I have just four or five fingers to play a chord. I'm probably thinking more, right? And so that's like, of course, a flaw which none of you should do, because you should think about it. But for me, usually I like to add a lower note of the root, just because I just kind of like that sound. It just adds that depth and that dimension to the low end. So I like that, but might reduce it. But let's hear it after EQing. Okay, so So might as well. 1 second. Actually, for this, I'm gonna use a slightly different EQ. It'll be good if you guys also try this one out. It's pretty good. Fab filter. Okay. So I'm just soloing. Yeah. That's the muddy bit. The bright sound, but there's still work to be done. So now I'm going to do something. I'm going to add a multi-band compressor. What a multi-band compressor does is that you can compress certain frequency spectrums. You don't have to compress all of them all together. Okay. And you could do it with different settings. Okay. So I'm going to just put in, Logic has one too. I'm going to just use Fab filter for now. Let's hear that. Also, I want that slightly overcompressed sound on the piano. That's what the signature funk sound is, right? I want it to be slightly overcompressed, so keep that in mind. Yeah, okay. So I just tamed the mids a little bit with compression. Yeah, so this one. Sizzle. Without it, huge difference. Let's blend it in. I might add it. Yes, sir. Okay, so I've just added a de-esser to the piano. What that does is that it just kind of tames the top end a little bit. Usually used for vocals, but you can use it on instruments as well. One second. So that's good. So it's probably my headphones, because I thought there was a lot of top end, but clearly there's nothing much happening. So that's fine. Okay. So I think we can lower the compression a bit. And what I'm going to also do is take that patch and reduce the synth sound a little bit. Here. This one. And finally, let's look into vocals once. Okay. Already clipping, so we're gonna sort that out by reducing the gain.
Mi canción favorita, siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos
So usually with vocals, I'll start, of course, with compression. For the sake of variety, I'm going to use the Fa filter compression, C2. Okay.
Favorita, siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda noche.
I'm going to set the release to auto right now. And of course, with this particular plugin, you have different settings. So I'm going to choose vocal. Okay, so that kind of sets the release on its own.
Favorita, siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda noche, aquí toda noche. Mi canción favorita, siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda noche, aquí toda noche. Siente tu calor, tú.
So as you can see, with even compression on the vocals, now usually I'll have two different compressors on the voice. One is slightly fast with a faster attack, and the other one with a slower attack if I require it. Okay, so here you can see it's doing about minus 8 dB of compression. Okay, and that's good enough. I think my threshold is about minus 12, not more than that, you know, because otherwise the vocal starts sounding too over compressed, and whatever other so-called differences in volume I might feel that are happening, I might fix that with automation. Okay, another thing that I particularly do, and maybe you guys can do it, is that before you even start compressing it, you basically level out your vocals, whether with automation or by chopping it up and matching the gain stage. The idea being, I'm not going to do it right now, it's going to be too long, but the idea being that, for example, well, let me just expand this. Okay, now here you can see that, you know, this is the chorus, for example, right here, and this is the verse. So I'm going to volume match everything so it sounds as consistent as possible. Okay, meaning that when you have edited it out to be consistent, your compressor won't fluctuate too much. That's the idea behind it. Okay, So you guys can do that. It, it pays a lot to invest that kind of time into mixing vocals in that context. Okay. So that's one way. If let's say you don't do that, apply medium amount of compression, don't over compress it, and then of course any volume difference you guys can automate it. Okay.
So that
Yes.
we have a question.
Hmm.
What are the alternative plugins? And this person is using Ableton.
So in Ableton, you will be using the stock compressor, that's available. I can show it to you in Ableton. And the other one is they have this, what do you call it? The peak compressor, right? The one which is based on the SSL. So point is that it doesn't really matter what DAW you're using, Ableton or that. Just use stock plugins and you'll get similar results. Of course, the sound engine of all these DAWs are slightly different, right? So they might end up sounding, it's slightly different, of course, because of the algorithms and everything. But in Ableton, just use the stock compressor or the what is it called? The peak compressor, the one with that emulates the SSL G series.
The
So
person
use
is saying that they have the light version. So
they have the light version, so I'm sure they must be having a compressor in it. There's just a stock compressor. You can use that. I'm pretty sure the light version has that. Okay. Any other question?
no, not yet.
Okay. So the point is, see, I'm just using Fab Filter because I'm used to those plugins and I'm quicker with them, right? I know how to deal with them. Rest, if you look at this, it's the same, right? Threshold, ratio, attack, release. Even on the Logic compressor, it's the same settings. It's no different, It's just that Fab Filter tend to sound more transparent to me. That's why I use them. It's very simple. Okay. So like I said, what you guys could do is match them. Okay. And then proceed with compression. Or once you're compressed, you can automate it later for volume peaks and those kind of things. Okay. So let's continue with vocal processing. Okay. Now let me just move this. One second.
Favorita, siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche. Mi canción favorita, siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche. Favorita, siente tu calor, tú me haces loco.
Give me a sec.
Siddharth, I must also remind you that the recording of the level 2 webinar is also on the YouTube. So if you have already done something in that, and it's the same session being used, you don't have to redo it.
No, I'm not going to do that. So, okay. So now I'm going to just add again EQ. Okay. And clean it up first. See, and with female vocals anyways, because there's nothing up to literally 112 hertz. Do you hear anything? I don't. So don't be afraid to put a high pass. That's my point. Okay? See, I can see that speaking, so I'm going to clean that up.
Siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche. Siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la
Very
noche.
quick EQ, mind you.
Noche. Mi canción favorita, siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche. Siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche. Mi canción favorita, siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche. Siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche. Mi canción favorita.
If you guys don't have a saturator, you can always there are many free plugins available for saturation, so you guys can download that. It's the same concept. Okay.
Favorita, siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche.
So what I'm doing is basically saturating these to sound more like a tube amp, like a tube preamp. Okay, that's what I'm doing. So let's hear that.
Favorita, siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche. Mi canción favorita. Siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche. Aquí toda la favorita. Siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche. Aquí toda la noche. Mi canción favorita. Siente tu calor, tú me
Without
haces
it?
loco. Somos aquí toda la noche.
With it,
Aquí
cleaner.
toda la
Pushes
favorita. Siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí.
And in the end, I'm going to just add a stock reverb. Now you can always send it as well. Okay. And you have different buses for reverb. You can do that. Absolutely. Okay. Recently, I've just been I like to just slap on the reverb because I use multiple reverbs in my mixes. Okay. So, which is why I tend to prefer this way as I have more control. Let's just put on the stock Logic thing. Let's hear that.
Favorita, siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche. Mi canción favorita, siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la favorita. Siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche. Mi canción favorita. Siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la favorita. Siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche. Mi canción favorita. Siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la favorita.
Just to
Siente
wet
tu
it up a
calor, tú
little bit.
me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche. Mi canción favorita. Siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la
Pan it
noche,
a bit to
aquí
the right.
toda la favorita. Siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche. Mi canción favorita. Siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la favorita. Siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche. Mi canción favorita. Siente tu calor, tú me haces favorita. Siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Mi canción Mi canción favorita. Siente tu calor, tú. Mi canción favorita. Mi canción. Mi canción favorita. Siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche. Mi canción favorita. Siente tu
version
calor,
now.
tú me haces loco.
I'm gonna just compress the master just to my taste a little bit.
Mi canción favorita. Siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche. Mi canción favorita. Siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche. Mi canción favorita. Siente tu calor, tú me haces loco.
It just tamed the peaks, that's all.
Toda la noche, aquí toda la noche. Mi canción favorita. Siente tu calor, tú me haces loco.
See, it's just controlling a little bit of that snare.
Mi canción favorita. Siente tu calor, tú me haces loco.
Okay.
Somos aquí
I'm gonna add a limiter.
aquí toda.
And let's yeah, limiter.
Mi canción favorita. Siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche. Mi canción favorita. Siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche. Mi canción favorita. Siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche. Mi canción favorita.
And let's just quickly sort out the vocal level.
Me hace loco, somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche. Mi canción favorita, siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche.
So right off the bat, you'll notice that the vocals, they're not overtly loud, right? But they're still sitting well in the context of the music, okay? And you can hear them clearly, See? I can of course push them up.
Siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche.
Right? So wait, I think I have automation on that. Wow. Give me a second. So yeah, see, I have automation here. I'm gonna put just to 0 for now, just so that it's easier for us to hear it. Okay.
Mi canción favorita.
And that's another thing. As soon as you get into automation mode, you guys can make changes. Like, for example, here, this is the last bit, and then we'll take questions.
Mi canción favorita. Siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda.
So when she says this section, maybe I want that to be louder, so I can maybe push that up here. Let's make this, yeah. Okay. Like, let's say I want this particular sentence to be louder. I can always push that up. 1 second. Yeah, let's see here, and then
Mi canción favorita.
let's see even this one, just for the sake of example. Okay.
Mi canción favorita. Siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda.
Maybe I want the loco to be louder here, right? Just saying. And I'm doing it very roughly, but you'll get an idea. Okay. Now, if I go back to the automation track, you'll see that the fader is moving up and down.
Mi canción favorita. Siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche. Mi canción favorita.
Let's say here also I want to increase. I'll do a drastic one so you can see it.
Mi canción favorita. Siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche. Mi canción favorita. Siente tu calor, tú me haces loco.
And you can do a similar thing with, let's say, delay. For example, let me add a delay quickly. Okay, a stereo delay.
Mi canción favorita. Siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche. Mi canción.
Okay, and let's say I just want a quarter note.
Mi canción favorita.
1 second, guys. Okay, let's do that.
Mi canción favorita. Siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche. Mi canción.
Let's say on the noche, when she says noche, I want the delay to turn on. Okay, so I could just put it in the latch mode. Let's hear it.
Mi canción favorita. Siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche. Mi canción favorita.
Just there. Okay, now if you read it, you'll notice this will turn on
Mi
there.
canción favorita. Siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche. Mi canción.
I mean, you can hear the delay. I didn't put it much, but I can increase that so it's more audible. Let's see.
Mi canción favorita, siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche. Mi canción.
That's and everything. I haven't done it in a very precise way, but let's just solo it.
Mi canción favorita, siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche.
You know,
Mi
that kind of
canción
thing.
favorita, siente tu calor, tú.
Let me just do it properly. Sorry. Let's put echo.
Mi canción favorita, siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche. Mi canción favorita.
So let's say if we had to do that.
Mi canción favorita, siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la
Something like that.
noche, aquí toda la noche. Mi canción favorita,
You know, and then when you hear it back, it's going to record all that.
mi canción favorita, siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche. Mi canción favorita, siente tu calor, tú me haces loco.
On the go as well, latch. You know, so stuff like that. And that's how you basically approach vocals, in the sense that, of course, after you've EQ'd it and everything, then you look at, okay, what does the section need? Does it need a lot of reverb? Like, you notice that I haven't really put tons of reverb, because I mean, in the context of the mix, it's very little, right?
Mi canción favorita, siente
if I
tu
switch
calor,
off
tú
the
me haces
reverb,
loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche.
right?
Mi canción favorita, siente tu calor,
It's just
tú
to help
me
it
haces
settle in with the
loco.
song.
Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche.
Cool, guys. So this is how I think you guys should approach mixing and processing your tracks for grade 6, 7, and especially for 7 and 8. You know, I think these are like the key ways to go about it. You know, we've covered everything from EQ, compression, you know, processing, gain staging, basic automation, and of course, like, this automation can apply to everything from send effects to compressor settings to, of course, volume changes and things like that. But the thing is that if you want to really do well in your coursework task, it is very important that you practice, because the thing is, I do this every day, right? And yet it took us almost 2 hours to not even do the fill track, right? And this is not what I consider it's a quick mix, right? Because obviously I'm trying to explain it to you on headphones and things like that. It's not that I'm making critical mix decisions here, right? This was more to show you the workflow and how you should proceed with it. Okay, I don't expect you to take similar settings and apply them to your mixes. They won't work. Very simple, right? But the approach you have to take is somewhat similar. Okay, and if you practice hard enough before your coursework tasks, you know, you'll be able to do this very quickly, because knowing what to do rather than, you know, just going randomly and saying, I've seen so many people do this. Oh, let's see the list of plugins. Oh, let's try this one. Now try this one. Let's try that one. You know, at the end of it, if you know how to use even one plugin, one compressor and one EQ, that's good enough. I know a lot of mix engineers who will just use the stock Pro Tools plugins, the stock Logic plugins, you know, the same compressor, the same EQ and everything, and the mixes still sound great. You know, don't get into this habit of having more plugins means that it means better mixes. In certain cases it helps, of course, but the workflow always remains the same. Okay, which is you process it with compression, EQ, right? Corrective EQ, then add effects. Okay, use specialized effects such as de-essing or modulation and saturation to get your desired results. And there is no way that at the end of it you won't get something which sounds at least half decent, you know. But I think one thing that you guys should take away, and I've said this in the previous classes, in the previous masterclass as well, is that the gain staging has to be immaculate. You know, that'll solve half of the purpose. Because see, think of it this way. Let's say even in your coursework task, or let's say if you're mixing anything, right, and you're unable to completely mix everything, like I'm unable to mix all the tracks right now, right, but it's still presentable to you guys, right? Even if I've just mixed the drums right now and just a bit of the vocals and the rest is just like leveling, it still sounds fine. Reason because at pre-production level we took those necessary steps to make it sound at least nice, you know. So meaning that your step one has to be that your production sounds good. Once your production sounds good, your mixes will automatically sound good. Okay, so I think leave the floor for questions now. Any questions you guys might have, and Ritesh, if you want to just kind of take over now.
Well, I don't see any more questions from anybody, but if anybody has any questions, you can email us at india@rslawards.com, and we will definitely get. And the session files will be available with me in case you have anything.
Yeah.
Like if you need the session file, just email us at india@rslawards.com, and we'll send it all back to you.
Yes.
And I think this was an immaculate session, man. It's a really amazing session. You covered almost everything that is required from grade 7 and 8. So if there's, if you guys have any questions about it, just feel free to reach out or ask us now, and we're there to help you.
Yes. Ritesh, there's one thing I want to cover, just one small thing, which is because it's part of the the coursework task in 7, I think, which I think because of time constraints, I just want to touch upon it. Okay.
Okay. One question is also there.
Yes.
About the ozone. What
Yes.
is the use of exciter in ozone?
The use of the exciter. Okay. So the exciter basically is a very simple plugin. Okay. It's there in Logic as well, actually. It's not just Ozone. Even Logic has it, and I'll show you what it does. Okay. For example, I'm going to put it on the master. Okay. I don't use, there it is. Okay. What the exciter does is that it takes certain frequencies, okay, usually in the high end, okay, and boosts them so that your overall sound sounds brighter meaning exciting. Okay, that's what it is. Okay, now please use it with caution. For example, without it sounds like this.
Mi canción favorita, siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche.
See what's happening?
Mi canción favorita, siente tu calor.
So you can set specific, this is very accentuated of course, but you can set specific sections in the frequency spectrum and push those to get so-called brightness in your overall mix or in your particular track. Now it sometimes does work on vocals, like maybe just like, for example, I want 1% push or 2% or 3%, you don't want to change the character, but for example on the master,
Mi canción favorita, siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche. Mi canción favorita, siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche.
okay, so now I've made up a quick setting for the master. Okay, without it sounds like this.
Mi canción favorita, siente tu calor, tú me
Now with
haces
it.
loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche.
Right? Now it helps. Okay, this is also a bit too much for my taste. I would probably put it around 10%, if at all.
Mi canción favorita, siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí.
So ozone exciter works exactly like this. Okay, it's going to take certain frequencies, it's going to detect certain frequencies and push those up so that the overall track sounds brighter, in turn more exciting. That's the whole concept. Okay, next question there is it okay to mix on headphones? It depends. I would actually say in an ideal scenario, no. Okay, there are reasons for it. Reason being that at the end of it, your mixes should be a response. Your mix decisions should be a response to how a pair of speakers reacts to an environment. Okay. Now, can you? Is it a strict no? No. I sometimes have to mix on headphones. If I don't have speakers here. Okay, I'm in Delhi currently. I don't have speakers here. I still mix on headphones, but I know these headphones really well by now. I've used them for the last 7 years, right? So I know how they translate onto my Genelex, or usually we use Genelex or Dyne Audio, those kind of speakers, So I know how they translate. Okay. So what I would say is that irrespective of, firstly, even if you're using headphones, use flat headphones, relatively flat headphones. Okay. Um, but try not to make any panning decisions on earphones. Okay. Because the way you will end up panning, because see, panning is a result of the space created, the sonic space created between two speakers, but with headphones it's going directly into your ear, right? So that stereo image is not really created, which you achieve uh, with speakers. But contrary to that, another, I think, right way to approach it is our headphones better than using great speakers in an untreated room? I would say probably yes, if you know your headphones really well. But what I like to do is that, for example, if I have no choice but to mix on headphones, I'll make my mixes on my headphones, but then I'll probably go to a studio to cross check and make the final changes. And I think that approach should be there. But I do know a few mix engineers who do use headphones to mix. Okay. But then they know their system really well. They're experienced enough to make those decisions. Ideally, no. Yeah. Any other questions?
You were talking about that grade 7 topic.
Yes. Now there is this particular thing about harmony tracks with vocals, right? Now the easiest way to do it is actually just for example, copy your, if you don't have like stuff like Melodyne and those kind of things, and if you're not too aware of flex pitch and stuff like that in Logic, the quickest way to do it is actually just duplicate the layer. And when you give me a second. Okay, for example, this one, right?
Favorita, siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí
I've
toda.
copied that and I'm selected the second one, which is this. I'll name it Harmony. Okay, and then I'm gonna transpose it maybe to a fifth or a third. Let's do it to a fifth.
Mi canción favorita, siente tu
So
calor.
what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take sections of it, because obviously it's not a proper harmony, right? But it's a good way to kind of add that flavor. So for example,
Mi canción favorita, siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche.
sounds really bad.
Mi canción favorita.
Actually, I'll tell you how to do the Acon effect. That'll be easier. So you can do that. It's an octave up, right?
Mi canción favorita, siente tu calor, tú me haces loco. Somos aquí toda la noche, aquí toda la noche.
So on the noche, for example, I can just one second. For example, I can just have it on every fourth count, right? Let's hear it.
Mi canción favorita,
Here, delete that.
favorita, siente.
Maybe on the local. So you end up with something like this.
Mi canción favorita, siente.
And of course, I'll have to quantize that, but I'll do it later. But let's hear it out.
Mi canción favorita, siente tu calor, tú me haces loco.
Quantizing. One second.
I think if you transpose it -4, it'll be better, because
Mi canción favorita, tú me haces loco.
-4. No, I want that. I want that baby effect. The baby talk effect.
which
We're
one?
trying to the Acon effect.
Acon effect. Okay.
Yeah.
Because I think the original track already has
Mi
harmony.
tú me haces loco.
It's basically a +12. So basically, the idea being that you basically you quantize it and everything, but that's the easiest way to basically transpose and then take cut sections to get your harmonies. That's what I'm trying to explain. So that's about it. Any other questions? Otherwise, we'll, I think, wind this up then.
Yeah, I don't see any more questions at this stage. So thank you so much, Siddharth. Wonderful session again.
Thank you so
And,
much. Yeah.
This is going to be on YouTube forever for people to refer to. Anytime
Yeah.
you're preparing for grade 6, 7, 8, you can refer
Yeah.
to the concepts taught here. And session files, you know where to find it. Just email us at india@rslawards.com and we'll get back to you. Right?
Fantastic. Thank you, everybody, for joining in and having the patience to hear me out for so many hours. And thanks to Ritesh for having me once again, and RSL. So, like I said, if you have any questions, shoot them across on our emails and we'd be happy to answer them. All right, guys. See ya.
Thank you. Thank you,
All right,
Siddharth.
Ritesh. Thank you. You
Thanks,
take care.
everyone. Bye.
Okay. Bye. Bye. Thank you.